means a lot that we have Michelle here as well. 25 years ago today, we were back at the scene of the crime. She was abducted in this parking lot. That was a crime that was perpetrated against her, which was allowed to be perpetuated by the Lubbock Police Department against my brother Tim. If you know anything about Timothy, you'll know that he was the consummate big brother. I'm going to deviate a little bit. This is my mother. Stand up, mother. She flew out here years ago with Timothy to visit this campus because we wanted to go to school here and possibly become a walk-on on the basketball team. Well, Tim enrolled here. He went a couple of years, knowing he had 6 other brothers and 1 sister behind him who were going to be attending college as well. So he had the idea that he would drop out of school, join the Army, and try to attain the GI Bill. So he flew back to DFW, called my parents and said, I've joined the Army. I'm going to get the GI Bill to help alleviate the financial burden that college brings, especially for 7 children. Well, life went on. He was able to complete that. And by that time, my sister Karen was enrolled here at the Texas Tech Law School, and my brother Reggie was a sophomore here. And he decided to return here. He was here just a couple of months, and then was picked up and arrested, as you may know, labeled as the tech rapist. He was bonded out of jail, taken back home, and another rape happened. Phone call from the attorney, Mike Brown, said, Miss Sessions, guess what? There was another rape tonight. And my mother said, oh, Mike, I'm so sorry to hear that. He said, well, guess what? They picked him out of the lineup. That's impossible. Tim was in Fort Worth, Texas. But I'll tell you, he left here. 18 months went by. Michelle did what she was supposed to. She was trying to find out why they had not prosecuted or brought this man to justice. 18 months. Mike Brown, the attorney, was trying to fight and say, hey, you have the wrong person. The Texas Tech chief of police also said, you have the wrong person. But the Lubbock Police Department said, no, they didn't. The day before trial, Tim was offered probation to plead guilty. He looked at my mother and said, I'm not pleading guilty to anything I did not do. And the trial commenced. He was convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison. I was a freshman at the University of Texas in September of 1986. The phone call came. It was from my mother. She said, they convicted Tim. It was a shockwave that went through our family. I remember coming home. I don't remember what day it was. But my mother and brother and sister had to leave Tim here in the county jail, convicted for something he did not do. And that night, about 2 a.m., I heard this constant chanting, God, I know you know they did not do this. You know he's not guilty. Over and over and over. And I woke up and I heard it. And I couldn't figure out why my other brothers and sisters could not hear this. It was my mother. on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I woke my father up out of a dead sleep. And he got up, girded my mother, and took her back to the bed. She calmed down. That day I will never forget. It rings in my head constantly. But as Tim said from the prison cell, my sister was here by herself because my brother Reggie was about to be labeled the other tech rapist by the Lubbock Police Department. So he had to get out of school. He was expelled from Texas Tech and ended up at the University of Texas. We all were coming here because this is where Tim said to go. But we couldn't. We ended up down there. But my sister Karen, in her second year of law school, wanted to transfer back to SMU where she did her undergrad. But Tim, writing from a Tennessee Colony, Texas prison farm, wrote back and said, "Do not leave Texas Law School. I still believe in the justice system, even though it does not believe in me." That was my brother. Still sending those letters to me in school saying what classes to take, what I ought to do, what I shouldn't do. That was Timothy. I paid a visit to him at the Tennessee Colony Farm. I went in there, and there he was, smiling. I'm nervous. He says, "How are you doing?" I said, "How are you doing?" He said, "I'm fine." He said, I said, "How so?" He said, "I'm thankful." I said, "How do you mean?" He said, "I'm thankful for the roof over my head and for each little piece of bread I get every day." And I walked out of that prison cell, and I remember, what do I have to complain about in life? Here's a man knowing he's not guilty, thankful for a prison roof over his head and the crumbs that they feed him. It was Timothy who told me to go work at the state capitol when I was in college. He said, "Go there, you can make changes." I was like, "Yeah, okay." There, I met a few senators, a few lawmakers, telling them about Timothy's story. But to them, it was just the same old story that they'd heard before. And I worked there a few years, and I said, "I'll be back." And on December 2nd, 1999, at 4:13 p.m., there were 3 knocks on his prison cell. But it was not from Jim Bob Darnell. It was not from the governor or some other state official. It was from the death angel. At 4:13 p.m., Timothy collapsed. He suffered a massive heart attack. Down on the ground, beaten back into the dust from which he came. But we didn't surrender. The chaplain called and said, "This session, will you be claiming his body?" She said, "Absolutely. He will not be in a pauper's grave at a prison farm." The funeral director called and said, "This session, his body is perfect. There isn't a mark on it." And at that moment, we felt we were surely blessed to spend 13 years at the hardest prison farms there were in this state. 7. She said the day of his funeral, today he dies as a convicted rapist, according to the state. But one day, world will know his name. And thanks to the Innocence Project of Texas, This man to my left, a news reporter who took a phone call from me, a letter I had, and said, hey, he's got a letter from a man named Jerry Lane Johnson admitting to a rape. He said, I'll do whatever it takes to prove my guilt. We came back, had the DNA test done. With pressure from Jeff on DA Matt Powell to do what he said he would do, we got the test done. 6 months went by. Phone call came to Michelle Mallon. They omitted the phone call from us. We had to force them to release history. We finally proved that the innocent do die in prison. Make no mistake, we don't believe Tim is the first, but he is the first to be recognized. And so we come to Lubbock to clear a dead man's name. The judge here says no. So we find another judge, courageous enough to hear Tim's case, to give him due justice, to clear his name. Judge Charles Baird, rarely used procedure on the court of inquiry that this man found in our Constitution. Clear his name. Many times in the letters Tim would write, he constantly said, I want vindication, exoneration, and a full pardon. Vindication came with the DNA test. Exoneration came because of the Innocence Project and Judge Baird. The pardon came after a tough fight with the governor. But Governor Perry and the Attorney General sided with us and said, you do have the power to pardon. He picked up the phone and called my mother and said, Miss Sessions, we're going to celebrate. I'm going to pardon him. I've always wanted to pardon him, but I just didn't feel like I had the power. But we thought he did, so we asked somebody else, the Attorney General, to issue an opinion. But we didn't stop there. To create laws that needed to be created, a battery of laws, eyewitness identification, which led her to pick the wrong person. Are you sure that's him? Recording interrogation. Things that we are pushing with the legislature then and now. You are an attorney or aspiring to be an attorney. Make sure you go to Washington, D.C. as I have been a few times, pushing legislation. There's a magnificent edifice there that is this United States Supreme Court. And on that building, there are 4 words that are carved into the edifice. And they read, equal justice under law. It applies to the living, and damn it applies to the deceased. You have to keep fighting. The state has recognized him as being wrongfully convicted. Governor Perry said, I want to know why he was wrongfully convicted. Jim Bob Darnell, in February of 2009, stood outside his courtroom and told my mother and my brother and I asked Matt Powell to get the file and tell me what went wrong. Why is it taking so long? Stop the stymieing tactics. If it happened to Tim, I promise you it's happened to somebody else in this town. They might be living. They might be dead. But don't let it happen again. My sister continued and finished law school. She's now the city attorney for Austin. We continue to fight. And I ask that you all join us in putting pressure on the city. They say they're not responsible because those officers don't work here anymore. You are responsible for the sins of your father. That does not